In this video, we're looking at childhood behaviours that are often misunderstood or overlooked, and how missing them and withdrawing early support can affect emotional regulation, relationships, and sensory well-being later in life, including into adulthood. We'll explore what research tells us actually helps, both early on and later in life. When we talk about missed behaviours, we're referring to behaviours that were explained away as personality, discipline issues, or just a phase, rather than understood as forms of communication or differences in how the nervous system processes the world. This video is not about labelling people, blaming parents, or pathologising behaviour. It's simply about creating understanding and awareness. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Here we look at behaviour through a developmental lens. That includes neurodiversity, sensory processing, developmental trauma, and emotional regulation. And just a quick note before we continue. This content is for education and understanding. It is not a replacement for professional support. If anything here brings up concerns about your own well-being or someone you care for, reaching out to a qualified professional can be an important next step. So now, let's look at 5 childhood behaviours that are often missed and why they matter. Behaviour 1. Being too good or very easy. One of the most commonly missed behaviours is being described as a very easy child or no trouble at all. These are children who follow rules, don't complain, and rarely draw attention to themselves, traits that are often praised in childhood. Sometimes this shows up in children who grow up in environments where adults are stressed, overwhelmed, or emotionally unavailable, even if those adults are loving. A child may learn very early that staying quiet, being helpful, or not having needs reduces tension around them. In other cases, children may be praised mainly for being well-behaved, mature, or independent, so they internalise the idea that taking up space or expressing distress isn't welcome. What looks like resilience on the outside can sometimes be a child adapting by suppressing their needs. And because there's no obvious disruption, there's often no concern. But for some children, this can reflect early self-suppression rather than emotional safety. From a nervous system perspective, this may be linked to a freeze or fawn stress response, where staying small, compliant, or invisible feels safest. Later in life, this can show up as people-pleasing, burnout, difficulty expressing needs, or chronic anxiety, despite appearing fine growing up. The second behaviour is emotional intensity or oversensitivity. Another commonly misunderstood behaviour is emotional intensity. Big reactions, crying easily, or strong emotional responses are often labelled as being too sensitive or overreacting, or sometimes dismissed as age or gender appropriate. But emotional intensity can reflect a nervous system that becomes overwhelmed more quickly, especially in children with sensory processing differences or early stress exposure. This can be seen in children who experience unpredictable routines, frequent changes, or high emotional energy around them. For some, it's linked to growing up in environments where emotions weren't talked about, named, or safely responded to. Others may have sensory systems that take in more information at once, so everyday situations feel louder, brighter, or more intense. Without support, children may be told they're too much rather than help to understand what their body is reacting to. When these responses are repeatedly dismissed or shamed, children often learn to hide emotions rather than regulate them. And when emotional intensity is minimized as just a phase, some individuals don't develop the support they need to build regulation skills. In adulthood, this can show up as emotional shutdown, shame around feelings, or difficulty managing stress and relationships. The third behaviour is withdrawal, daydreaming, or disengagement. Some children don't act out, they simply shut down. This can show up in children who feel overwhelmed by noise, social demands, or expectations they don't fully understand. Some children withdraw when they don't feel emotionally safe to express themselves, or when previous attempts to engage haven't been met with understanding. Others may retreat into imagination or quiet activities as a way of self-soothing or coping with stress. Because they aren't causing problems, these children are often overlooked, even though they may be struggling internally. They may appear quiet, withdrawn, or lost in their own world. They might avoid group activities or seem disengaged. Because this looks calm on the surface, it's often interpreted as shyness, introversion, or independence. From a developmental lens, this can be a sign of shutdown, dissociation, or sensory overload. Over time, this may contribute to difficulties with connection, fatigue after social interactions, and challenges of identity or self-confidence. Behaviour number 4 is bluntness or very direct communication. Blunt or very direct communication is another behaviour that's often misunderstood. For example, some children, including those with undiagnosed social communication disorders, may communicate very literally. They might say exactly what they notice or ask direct questions or struggle with indirect language like hints, sarcasm, or reading between the lines. This isn't a lack of empathy. It's often a difference in how social information is processed and expressed. Some children say exactly what they think, struggle with social filtering, or miss unspoken social rules. This is frequently labelled as rudeness or attitude rather than recognised as a difference in communication style or perception of the world. When children are repeatedly corrected for how they communicate instead of being gently supported to understand social expectations, they may begin to over-monitor themselves. Later in life, this can contribute to anxiety in relationships, workplace conflict, or feeling the need to constantly mask who you are. The fifth and final behaviour is sensory distress that's normalised. Sensory distress that can become normalised, often because a child has learned that accommodations will not be made. Strong reactions to clothing, noise, food textures, hair brushing, or busy environments are often dismissed as fussiness. It's important to remember that children don't always understand what's happening in their bodies. They may not have the words to say, "This noise hurts my ears," or "This fabric feels overwhelming on my skin." Instead, distress comes out as tears, avoidance, anger, or refusal, which can be misinterpreted as behaviour rather than communication. When adults don't recognise the sensory cause, these signals are easily dismissed or disciplined away. But ongoing sensory overwhelm places the nervous system under constant stress. When this isn't recognised early, people may grow up believing the world is something they simply have to tolerate, often at a cost. In adulthood, this can show up as emotional exhaustion, avoidance, or difficulty coping under pressure. Before we finish, I want to share a few principles and not fixes that research and clinical work consistently shows can help both in childhood and later in life. Regulation comes before expectation. Dr. Jean Ayres' work on sensory integration showed us that people function best when their nervous system is organised and not overwhelmed. When we talk about an organised sensory system, we mean a nervous system that feels settled enough to focus, learn and respond, rather than constantly being on high alert. When sensory input is manageable, the brain can prioritise thinking, learning and connecting with others. From both sensory and trauma-informed perspectives, expecting learning or behaviour change before the body feels safe often sets people up to fail. This means we need to explore adjusting environments and demands rather than pushing through distress. Behaviour reflects nervous system capacity. Rather than seeing behaviour as due to motivation or attitude, it can be more helpful to see it as a reflection of the nervous system's capacity in that moment. Stress, sensory input, and past experiences all affect how much capacity someone has to cope in various scenarios, and this will differ from person to person. This nicely leads into our next tip, which is support the body, not just the mind. Dr. Jean Ayres emphasised that sensory input, such as movement, pressure, rhythm, and predictability, plays a key role in organising the nervous system. Sensory input is the information our body takes in from movement, touch, sound, sight, and our sense of balance. Things like deep pressure, predictable routines, movement breaks, or calming rhythms can help the nervous system feel more stable. These supports don't fix behaviour, they support the body so regulation becomes possible. So in addition to considering talking therapies, it is also important to consider if the body's sensory needs are being met. Co-regulation builds self-regulation. Self-regulation develops through repeated experiences of co-regulation. Co-regulation means having another person help calm your nervous system before you can calm yourself. It is being soothed, understood, and supported by another regulated nervous system. For children, this might look like a calm adult sitting nearby, using a steady voice or helping name what's happening. Over time, the nervous system learns what calm feels like, and self-regulation develops from those repeated experiences. This applies whether someone is 5 or 35. Reduce shame, increase meaning. When behaviours are misunderstood, people often internalise shame. Naming experiences like sensory overwhelm, shutdown, or stress responses help people make sense of themselves rather than blame themselves. Support is protective, not remedial. Research on adversity shows that supportive relationships and environments act as powerful protective factors. It can mean building positive relationships, being believed, having needs accommodated, adjusting expectations, or being given tools that make daily life more manageable. Support reduces the long-term impact of stress on the nervous system. It doesn't create dependence. In fact, appropriate support often increases confidence, resilience, and independence over time. Needing support doesn't mean something went wrong. It means the nervous system adapted and now needs care. And before we end, remember, some people struggle not because they aren't trying hard enough, but because their nervous system learned to survive in a world that didn't meet their needs. Whether you're a parent, an educator, a professional, or someone trying to understand yourself, this space is about clarity, compassion, and evidence-based understanding. And if that sounds helpful, you're in the right place. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll know when the next video is out.